right, from outer space to overseas, right now, Vice President J.D. Vance and top U.S. negotiators are in Pakistan for high-stakes peace talks with Iran.
Yeah, as we said, a lot going on these days. President Trump says he is preparing the military to resume military strikes if a deal is not reached.
Lucas Tomlinson is live in Islamabad with the very latest. Good morning, Lucas.
Good morning, guys. Less than a week after President Trump declared a 2-week ceasefire, Vice President J.D. Vance is already here for the first face-to-face talks with Iran since that ceasefire has been declared and since the war started 6 weeks ago. And it appears to be a war that both sides want to have ended. And the vice president could potentially be the most senior U.S. leader to meet an Iranian official since the 1979 revolution face-to-face. And Vice President Vance just met with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Vance arrived here in Pakistan about 5 hours ago. The president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner are also here. Vance was met by Pakistan's Army Chief and Field Marshal Asim Munir. He dressed in civilian clothing. Last night, Munir was in a military uniform when he greeted the Iranian delegation when they arrived late last night. Leading the Iranian delegation, the Speaker of Iran's parliament and former mayor of Tehran. Iran's foreign minister is also here, while Air Force Two was en route to Islamabad. Gallup, the Iranian speaker, issued 2 ultimatums before negotiations could proceed: a ceasefire in Lebanon and the release of Iran's blocked assets. Just a few moments ago, before we went on air, guys, a U.S. official is denying that the U.S. has released any assets before these talks have even started. Here was Vice President Vance before departing for the talks here in Islamabad.
I think it's going to be positive. We'll, of course, see. As the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive. So we're going to try to have a positive negotiation. The President has gave us some pretty clear guidelines, and we're going to see.
And President Trump telling the New York Post, quote, "We have a reset going. We're loading up the ships with the best ammunition, the best weapons ever made, even better than what we did previously. And we blew them apart. And if we don't have a deal, we'll be using them, and we will be using them very effectively." Some key issues hanging over these talks as more U.S. forces arrive in the region with 2 key issues. That's opening up the Strait of Hormuz, also the future of Iran's nuclear program. And it appears that the Iranians are happy that Vice President J.D. Vance is here in Islamabad to lead the talks after previous talks before the war failed, guys.
So Lucas, real quick, Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Galibaf, put these preconditions for the talks to start that included ceasefire in Lebanon and unfreezing of assets. Is there any indication that this is in jeopardy of starting? And then on top of that question, I see where you are. Is there an indication that once the talks start, if they do, that we'll see something?
We were told before the trip to be wary of what the Iranians are putting out, Griff. And just a few minutes ago, the Iranian side said that the U.S. had agreed to release these assets, billions of dollars in sanctions relief. But just moments before coming on air, Griff, a senior U.S. official denied that any sanctions relief had taken place, saying simply, "We haven't even sat down to begin these negotiations." Again, Vice President Vance just wrapping up a meeting with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and has not yet met face-to-face with the Iranian delegation. And by the way, there's no guarantee that Vance will be meeting face-to-face with the Iranian side. Pakistan is mediating these talks, and just like we saw in Oman, these exchange of notes could be taking place. But the vice president is here in Islamabad to lead the talks, and he would be the most senior U.S. official to meet an Iranian delegation since before the 1979 revolution, guys.
You know, wow. Lucas, you'd given some biographical points about the Iranian side of the negotiations. What do we know about them personally in the sense of, how much of hardliners are they? What can we sort of expect from, how they'll be pursuing these negotiations?
Well, if I heard you correctly, Lisa, a little distance here, some 7,000 miles away, President Trump wants to see the Strait of Hormuz open. That's a big issue. And as we heard from General Keane, Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz to stop the war, and the U.S. has effectively stopped the war. But the White House has insisted all week that this war was only going to last 4 to 6 weeks. Today marks 6 weeks since the start of the war, Lisa.
Well, Lucas, I don't know if you can hear me. What I wanted to know is, For the Iranian side, are they hardliners? What do we know about them personally and the way that they might be entering into these negotiations?
Well, Gallup, the former mayor of Tehran, who is the Iranian speaker, he is someone that some on the U.S. side, the Trump administration, think they can deal with. He's a hardliner, certainly has a career in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, but he is someone that the Trump administration thinks they can negotiate with. If they didn't, Lisa, Vice President Vance, as Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner would not have boarded those planes and flown here to Islamabad. So it's someone they do feel like they can negotiate with. But as we just saw in the weeks prior, over a month of round-the-clock bombing, some 13,000 airstrikes, if these talks don't bear fruit, the U.S. military's finger is still on the triggers, we were told, and this war could resume.
Yeah. Thank you, Lucas. Good stuff.
Thanks, Lucas.
Certainly high-stakes negotiations going on here, and an important reminder, as Lucas just pointed out, that President Trump says he still has his finger on the trigger, and if things do not go well and they don't feel like Iran is negotiating in good faith, he will pull that trigger and get back to bombing the ever-living daylights out of Iran.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.